Photography Daily.
The underlying force of whatever I achieved was driven by deep passion and obsession.
Described as one of the most influential fashion, portrait and celebrity photographers of our time. Scotsman Albert Watson today, who found fortune and fame in America.
And I was very keen after the Royal College to go back there. And I persuaded my wife to apply for a teaching job, which she got. And I went in as her dependent. Thank God for my wife,
It's a fantastic story of creating opportunity, and it all starts in the offices of Max Factor.
The guy said, I love your pictures. He said, but you don't have any beauty shots. And I basically said, they're on a boat coming soon.
We talk about that first infamous paycheck.
I got into the elevator and kind of ripped open the envelope. I looked at it quickly, and it looked to me like it was $150 for 5 shots. You have to remember, this is 1971.
Yeah.
That was a good chunk of money.
That 150 turns into quite a lot more, as you'll find out. And then there's the creative celebrity work that's made Albert Watson a household name.
And then they said, he's a gourmet chef. He's going to give us, for the Christmas issue, a recipe for goose. Of course, it was a good headline. Alfred Hitchcock cooks his own goose.
We talk about that famous Rolling Stones frontman shot.
We'd planned to shoot Jagger in the front of a Corvette with the Leopard. And it turned out the Leopard was just simply too dangerous,
And we discuss how that picture, the Cat and Jagger, was made.
I photographed the Leopard first, and I drew where the leopard was. The eyes and the nose.
We chat about how a 40-year analog career managed to find its digital feet.
There were aspects of it that I thought were just awful, terrible, and cheap looking. But there were other aspects where I thought, my goodness, I can really use this.
Stories of life told by photographers. And today that photographer is Albert Watson.
There were times I was working where it was so cold I couldn't feel fingers at all, but I didn't notice. Obsession and passion, these are all ingredients of the cake of who you are, the recipe of who you are,
If you can count the amount of times you hear the word passion today, I will buy the beers when we next meet, promise, because we're going to talk a lot today about that word. Well, the patron of the day is about to, and our guest Albert Watson is certainly going to, and I'm going to shoehorn the word with good reason into my MPB mention today. Stand by. If you're buying, selling or trading used camera gear online in the States, the UK or Europe, one website address for you, mpb.com. And here's where the passion bit comes in. I've put my money where my mouth is on all 3 things: buy, sell, trade with MPB. And sometimes I've called their contact number on the website to talk with someone about what I'm interested in buying. And unlike some stores where you go in, you ask a question and you're greeted with a shrug and a read back of the ticket on the item you could have read anyway, you'll get through to real and very passionate photographers who look after those questions that come in on the telephone, i.e. you will talk with somebody who knows your brand or the camera you want to know about, or even put you onto somebody who definitely knows about the stuff you're wanting to know about. You don't get that on pretty much all online marketplace websites for cameras. And that is the, if you will, passion difference of going to mpb.com. Are you keeping up with all these mentions of that word? Patron of the day today is Johan Otterdal Edfeldt, and here's a website to go look at, which I'll link to, of course, within the famous show notes, which you'll find on your podcast player app show description, as always. The site is stayuntilforever.com, the work of a portrait, lifestyle and fine art photographer. He's a committed van lifer, and we talked about how and why he does that within the Patreon feed. Although I need just a couple of pictures only from your website, Johan, to entirely understand why you do this. It looks a fantastic way of life, and from what I hear, you've done it for 7 seasons now. And before you go saying, well, that's okay if you're in your early 20s, Neil, it's not that kind of story at all. And he has some thoughts about why we choose photography as a lifestyle itself. And here's that word again, passion. To use Johan's words, my passion has always controlled my life and dreams. Even if it's been a crazy journey with no straight lines or rules, it's shaped me. I believe everyone should have at least one passion, something you dream about, something that gets a glow in your eyes and a fuel for your soul. Yes, Johan. Simply yes. And next week, a national geophotographer and writer called Rolf Smith, whose passion for cycling rescued his wanderlust during lockdown. And he too has a thing or three to say about that word. And we kind of touched on passion and how photography calms your soul in a follow-up to the YouTube film I made called Photography Heals Me yesterday on the Patreon feed. There's lots to talk about as always on that platform. So, to today's guest, Albert Watson, OBE. The story today of moving from Scotland to America to the bright lights of LA, which must have been very dazzling for a young photographer loaded with creativity and ideas, ready to take on the photographic world with all that youthful naivety, which I think is essential at a journey's outset, when every door seems, if not open, positively ajar. And that's what Albert's life has been, really, opening doors, doing what he does with absolute self-belief and, here's the word again, passion. There's no let up for a photographer who spent 50 years photographing fashion, beauty, portraits and celebrity culture. He's released many books and catalogues. His latest book, Albert Watson, Creating Photographs, is a series of bite-sized lessons, unveiling the stories behind his most famous shots, how to work with lighting and lenses, to learning to embrace your creativity, and advice on getting your foot in the industry door. A series of stories today, with a caveat that he suggested we regroup to record some more in the coming months. I say with a big smile on my face. This is Albert Watson. Albert, photography's gain is mathematics' loss because it seemed like you were destined to do something with your incredible mathematic muscle, such that you'd flexed working in the air ministry in your first job prior to uni, which was calculating the path of missiles had they ever been fired toward Russia. Not the start of a story many people might expect. So it's maths or something creative, but you certainly wanted to learn, didn't you?
Yeah, I was determined to go back to university. Yeah. When I say back to university, go to university, because I left school, went to London for 1 year, then a chocolate factory for a year. But I was determined to go back to university. I was determined. And I took mathematic classes at night school. And I also had 2 days a week going to art classes. So at the end of the year, I missed the application to Edinburgh Art College. So I applied to Dundee, and I got into Dundee, which is the Duncan of Jordanstone College of Art up in Dundee, which is part of St Andrews University.
And this is where you started to study graphic design, wasn't it?
That's correct. I had 2 years general art.
Yeah.
And what they do is you do pottery, you do drawing, painting, a lot of drawing and painting, because they felt that was a basis of a lot of art. And you had a history of art, silversmithing, graphic design, textile design, and you could specialize. There were different schools within the college.
Yeah,
I love graphic design. I still do. I went into graphic design school, and I took the craft subject, which was the first year ever they did it, was photography. By this time, it was 1964 to 66 that I studied and specialized in graphic design, and the craft subject was photography.
Now, I know the graphic design is very important. I'm going to fast forward slightly. 1966, you've got an IBM scholarship. You just found your way into the Royal College of Art Film School. There's a lot of film and graphics influence in your work, isn't there?
That's who and what I do. But I greatly value the education that I got at that time in Dundee. And it was a disciplined education. It even had its roots in almost Victorian teaching of the way they would teach.
So with this deep knowledge now of graphic design, your next move is to America. And I know that it was your wife that had a teaching job in America that facilitated that move. Was it a bit of a leap of faith, though?
I had gone to America in the summer of 66.
Yeah.
I went to New York, Aspen, Colorado for a design conference.
Yeah.
Then LA, San Francisco, Chicago, Washington, D.C. And then back up to New York and then back home. And that took 3.5 weeks, nearly 4 weeks.
Yeah.
And it had a big impression on me, places like LA and San Francisco and so on.
Yeah.
And I was very keen after the Royal College to go back there. And I persuaded my wife to apply for a teaching job, which she got. And I went in as her dependent. Thank God for my wife, So we ended up in LA because I had put in with her the application of maybe New Orleans. And then they said New Orleans for British people is very hard because of the heat and the humidity, and whereas LA has a better weather pattern. So in we went, and we just simply stayed, there. That was that was 1970. We arrived on August the 28th, 1970.
I love I don't know whether this was the first job, but I'd like to believe it was. I think it was the first big one. Starting afresh in a new country, you went to see the head of Max Factor, but you went to see the head of Max Factor without any beauty shots.
That is correct.
You didn't have any.
He said, the guy said, I love your pictures. He said, but you don't have any beauty shots. And I basically said, they're on a boat coming soon. And that's when he turned around and said, look, I'll tell you what I'll do for you. I've got a closet here with clothes from various shootings, and I'll book a model for an hour for you. And he said, let me see what you can do. So I went to a model agency, picked a model. I picked some dresses, and I then met the model, and I said to her, how about if we spend the day photographing, not an hour, but the day photographing, and I'll give you some outtakes for your portfolio. And she said, sure. And she also said, I've got a friend of mine who's a male model. Would you be interested in him coming too? And we could photograph together and so on, etc. We started at 7:00 in the morning, and I shot a solid 12 and a half hours. I put every penny I had into the film, and I was very conservative with the film as I shot, and I didn't have any assistants.
Do you remember what you were shooting with?
I had a Hasselblad with two lenses, an 80 millimeter and a 150, and I shot 60 rolls of film, and I took all the film in. And there was a kind of an art department there, and I put them all on a light box, a huge light box they had. And when the guy came in, the first thing he said was, "You shot this in an hour?" And I was like, "No, not quite." I said, I booked her for an hour, so you only have to pay for her for an hour. But I talked her into staying all day. Now, I think that impressed him as much as anything, in a way, that I had talked the model into staying, to do the picture. So anyway, he took a long time looking at the pictures, and I was just standing. He didn't say much. And he grabbed like 4 or 5 rolls of film, different shots. And he said, I'll be right back. Well, he was away for quite a long time. It must have been about 20, 25 minutes. I was just sitting there waiting. And he came back and he said, I have some good news for you. He said, we're going to buy 5 of these shots. And I thought, wow, that's great. And he said, I've got a couple of shootings coming up that I think we can, basically do business with you, sort of thing. And he said, let me give you a PO. And of course, at that time, I had no idea what a PO was, a purchase order. So he put it in an envelope, and I went, and he said, but we can do a meeting next week. And he said, I'll let you know about other stuff going on. So of course I was very happy, very ecstatic. And I got into the elevator and kind of ripped open the envelope. I looked at it quickly, and it looked to me like it was $150 for 5 shots. You have to remember, this is 1971. Yeah. That was a good chunk of money for a day, $750. I mean, the photographers today working for $750, they'll be happy to get $750. So anyway, I got home, and I told Liz, my wife, it was very exciting. And they said, it's great. And I said, we're going to do a bill. So she borrowed a typewriter from the school she was at, and she was typing it out, and she said, well, it looks like it's not $150, but it looks like it's $1,500. And I was like, no, it can't be $1,500, because now that's $7,500. And I thought, that's impossible. So then, of course, the big discussion was all that weekend was whether or not we should try our luck and bill for $7,500, and then we thought it could be some form of embezzlement or against the law or something, or they might deport us or some scandal or something. Yeah. So the next thing was, I said, I have a meeting on Tuesday with the guy. So we didn't bill. And I spoke to him. I said, I just wanted to speak to you about the money. and we clarified it. It said $7,500 all we had in the budget at the moment, but I could probably get you a bit more the next time. So of course I was like, no, that's fine, sort of thing, And then I always remember at the very bottom of the piece of paper, I should have kept it at the PO, and at the bottom it said plus all expenses, meaning the film and and it listed lunch or anything like that. I mean, I'd bought the people a sandwich, that was it, sort of thing. And that was really the start.
A Scotsman in America, was that at that time equally quite a nice point of difference for you as well, Albert? A bit of a USP?
Oh, I think it was. I mean, I think they found me amusing. I had quite long hair at that time. I looked a bit like a hippie. I always remember with doing a shooting for Max Factor, and I remember telling 3 American models on a hill what I wanted them to do, to run down the hill, and they had these flowing dresses on, and I said to them, I just want you to run down, interact with each other, throw your heads back, move your head, so the hair's moving, like a high energy beauty shot sort of thing. And so I went on and explained in great detail, when you come down halfway, stop and then start again, and then come down a little bit more, stop and start again. So I kept telling them all this information, and I turned around to walk down the hill. And then one model said to the other model, "What did he say?" And another model said, "I don't know, but just laugh." Just laugh. I just run down the hill and laugh. So when I first got there, nobody could understand what I was saying because my accent was very heavy. Of course, over the years, it changed and mellowed and took on a slight American, with the Scottish sort of thing.
But as this was going along, you were having to really invent yourself from day one, weren't you? You were Max Factor, the first big client, then you're doing more fashion work. How are you handling this?
I began to do basically every single job I could get my hands on.
Right.
And I would call people, and I remember seeing a hospital appliance catalog that was terribly photographed, that was very badly done. And I remember calling this company and asking to speak to the catalog production person. And I got through to them and I said, "Can I show you my portfolio?" And of course, I had maybe 2 still life things in the portfolio. And I went to see this guy. And he gave me this huge catalog of hospital appliances, including a whole section on bedpans. And back then, which sounds now incredible, it had to be shot to size. So that involved me going out and renting an 8x10 camera. And the size of the objects was a straight copy to the size in the catalog. I know it sounds incredible, but it meant if a bedpan, for example, was 3 inches high in the catalog, then I had to shoot it on the camera, measure it on the camera at 3 inches. And the catalog was 8x10. And then they give you a strict layout of doing it. So it's not easy. And then, as any photographer will tell you, photographing an object like a bedpan, which is chromed, like an electric kettle is chromed or a pot. It's not the easiest thing in the world to photograph, in light, because I didn't have a lot of experience in that. And of course, I ended up it was a nightmare, the job, really. And by that time, I was getting more and more jobs, and I was busy, and I was doing locations, I was doing swimsuits, and I was doing insurance ads. And then the next thing was Datsun. They called me. And then the next thing was I was a car photographer photographing trucks. I shot every single thing you could imagine.
You don't imagine those famous Albert Watson bedpan pictures are still out there, do you, somewhere?
I think they were for a while, but I think in case anybody found them after I'm dead and buried, that they found the bedpan shootings.
The famous Albert Watson bedpan shots. Your work is very varied, though. I mean, let's talk technically now, as well as creatively, from stark democratic white backgrounds to more complex outdoor location shoots. I know you believe in the importance of a team and assistants and makeup and editors. What's your philosophy on set when it comes to things like lighting, though? Do you like to control everything, or do you trust the people around you to do that for you?
No, I'm afraid I absolutely. As far as lighting is concerned, I'm 100% control freak.
Right.
I have to say, you might say I'm guilty of that. I would never rely on anybody else to do that. I would much prefer to solve it myself. And, you work with good assistants who know basic structure of putting something together and what's necessary. But since I'm changing all the time, it's very hard for them to do. It's not like if the shooting starts at 8 o'clock in the morning, I'm never turning up at 9:30, 10 o'clock.
No.
I mean, I'm there at 8 o'clock in the morning with everybody else when they're setting up,
You're incredibly well known and respected for your stylized portrait work with celebrities, shots that are simply household trademarks almost of those you photograph. The wonderful picture of Keith Richards, veiled by his famous tobacco, that picture of Alfred Hitchcock with a goose, which we'll talk about, Aretha Franklin, Malcolm X, B.B. King's wonderful dramatic pout, and then Jagger in that cat shot, which we'll talk about as well. But when did the celebrity work really start to take off for you?
I think it was 1973, 74, and we got a call from Harper's Bazaar. We were still in LA, and there was a call from New York, from the art director of Harper's Bazaar magazine. They had heard from a couple of people that I was an interesting photographer, I guess, whatever they said about me.
Yeah.
They said, we'd like you to photograph somebody famous who can't tell you until tomorrow. I said, okay. And of course, I was very excited that a New York magazine was calling me. So it hadn't happened before, really. And then they called back and they said, we'd like you to photograph Alfred Hitchcock. And of course, I was like, wow, okay. And then they said, he's a gourmet chef. He's going to give us, for the Christmas issue, a recipe for goose. Of course, it was a good headline. Alfred Hitchcock cooks his own goose. And they said, we'd like him holding a plate with a cooked goose on it. And I said, okay, that's not a problem. I kind of thought about it. And an hour later, I called them back. And I said, the one thing that it's a cooked goose has got to be about 25, 30 pounds. I said, to kind of hold that on a silver platter might be a difficult shot for him. Not for me, I guess, but yes, difficult for me too. And it would necessitate a table. I was a bit worried that he looked like a maitre d' because he always had a bow tie.
Yeah.
And I thought he might look like a maitre d' bringing it to your table, which may or may not be a good thing. And they said, well, what do you want to do? I said, well, I thought I could just get a plucked goose, like he was going to cook it, not he'd cooked it. And I can put some Christmas decorations around the neck to give it a little bit of Christmas.
Yeah.
And they said, okay, let's get back to you. They got back to me and they said, yeah, we love that. And I said, I can make it look like he throttled the goose.
Which was very Hitchcock.
Which is more Hitchcock.
Yeah.
That was really, the shot was enormously successful.
I mean, it's become a shot that's synonymous with you.
Yeah. I mean, it was just, and sometimes people ask me, what's your favorite shot? I would say, well, that's one of them. Not because I think it's the best shot. I think there's a lot more complicated, more difficult shots that I've done that involved a lot more planning, thought, work, and so on. But, I liked it because I pulled it off.
Yeah.
I remember being nervous, that's for sure.
You were nervous?
Of course, yes. Yeah. I wasn't, people say, well, you must have been confident. I was not confident. I was nervous. And also I was lucky it was Hitchcock because he helped.
So you kind of co-directed?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, he said, what do you want me to do? And of course I didn't tell him about the plate or anything like that. Yeah. And I said, I just want you to hold this. And of course he was very funny when he first held, he was holding the goose like this, and I said to him, maybe you can have a look at the goose. And he said, of course, So he turned his head, then he turned the goose's head towards him. And he said, would you like the goose to remain eye contact? He said. So he was fabulous.
Yeah.
And he knew I was nervous, but he helped me. And then at the end of it, he said, you look like you could do with a nice cup of tea. And then the next thing was that I was in his office having shortbread biscuits with Hitchcock. So it was a bit shocking,
Perfect. I mean, there are a few shots like that are synonymous with you. The nude Kate Moss shots. You didn't know who she was, but I mean, that's become an exceptionally iconic shot, not just for you, but for her.
I knew she was up and coming. She was beginning to create a stir in the business. So, and I said, okay, we just spend one day photographing with her. And then I met her, and I met her the night she arrived, and I met her, I liked her. And she was quite positive about working. You know, she had another person that had that was Monica Bellucci. Monica Bellucci had the same thing, and she had that intensity. And Kate had a bit of that, you know. And I said, I have good news and bad news about tomorrow. And I said, what do you want first, the good news or the bad news? And she said, well, give me the bad news. I said, it's only you tomorrow, nobody else. And she said, oh, that's not bad news. And she said, well, what's the good news? I said, the good news is it's only you tomorrow. In other words, the good news and the bad news is the same, you know, because sometimes you get models that come in and they're so happy that it's just them, that they're the number one. It's all about them. So anyway, we started working with Kate in the morning at 7 o'clock, and I worked with her until 9:30 at night. Wow. She worked 14 hours.
Wow.
And that nude shot that I did of her, I said, I want you to forget that you're nude and just imagine that you're more like an elf or a fairy in the woods or something spiritual. Yeah. And it said that you're looking for somebody, you know. And at that time, I was really beginning to shift really strongly away from beauty shots and into what I call beauty portraits. So I had begun to work on much more emotions and try to switch from beauty shots to portraiture, you know, where I could try and squeeze something out of the model. And of course, I got photographing a lot of actors, and I was trying to incorporate some of that into the fashion beauty that I did.
We're back with Albert Watson in a moment. Over on our Patreon channel this week, which you can link to through the website, another 2 stories written only for patron ears. The Tuesday and Thursday shows, a shorter edition, diary come inspiration, come shorter interviews, cuts from chats with photographers where the official tape, if you will, is no longer rolling. It's a real sort of open book, if you like. An opportunity to talk about all manner of things that we don't do in the interview shows or on the Friday photo walk. On Tuesday just gone, for example, I talked with Fujifilm ambassador from Canada, Ian MacDonald, about how photography, he believes, cured and healed his PTSD, which was an unwelcome gift from having worked for many years as a paramedic, his words. Tomorrow, a series of thoughts and stuff I've been introduced to. It's a show about thinking outside the normal parameters. A reporter who chose to conceal a microphone to make the most incredible story on the street. An Instagram account that went wildly viral, tricked everyone really, when the photographer behind it created a work of fiction in a grid that took subscribers by surprise. And the man behind the noises you hear when you start up your Apple computer. Thinking outside the box day tomorrow over on Patreon. And for the price of a cup of high street latte and a cake per month, you too can join this Patreon club where we all talk and meet and share our stories about our own photography. Right, back to Albert Watson. Well, the portraits, from where do you get these ideas? They're fantastical. Jack Nicholson is one of my favourites, those many reflections. Mick Jagger, I have the good fortune to see into your office, and I can see behind you that wonderful Jagger picture. The big Jagger as a big cat, and Bowie's head in a box. These are so creative.
Well, I mean, you have to go back to the idea of graphic design, and part of the thing in graphic design at that time was, what's your idea for this book jacket, for this album cover, for this poster for a circus? What's your idea? I love the idea when they forced me to think of something. I mean, I did for a play that was on called Toys in the Attic. That was a well-known play. And we used to do posters for the repertory company in Dundee Rep. And I remember doing this. I thought about toys. How can I make this? It was a psychological drama. And how can this idea of toys in the attic and something strange. And then I remember photographing the daughter of one of the lecturers there. Just a very simple shot of a child. And then I remember taking children's wooden blocks, building blocks.
Yeah.
And I took 6 of them. I then divided the photo into 6 and put them as building blocks. And then I realized that in a surreal way, I could put the building blocks in any configuration. So therefore, the building blocks represented toys. And for the surreal aspect, I could split up the face.
Yeah.
And just separate it slightly. And there was endless combinations there. So this was a way that I could suggest the surreal and suggest something apart from that. And graphically, it worked out beautifully. And just simple type, toys in the attic. And the blocks made a statement of toys, and the child was smiling. So, of course, by the time you split it up a little bit, the smile became something not. The picture was very cute of her, just a little smiling snapshot. But when you applied it to building bricks and cut it and separate it, it became interesting.
But is this kind of detail, the coming together of idea, concepts, creativity, visualization, is such a hallmark of your work, Albert. And then as mentioned, there's this Mick Jagger shot where his face, pre-Photoshop I might add, morphs in the still image into a big cat, or possibly the other way around, a supremely creative picture. Where on earth did that idea spring from?
That kind of came spontaneously. Some of it came spontaneously. A lot of times I was planning. The Mick Jagger shot was not planned. Was it not? Happened. Ah. No, it was not planned, because we'd planned to shoot Jagger in the front of a Corvette with the Leopard. And it turned out the Leopard was just simply too dangerous, I knew that. I'd photographed a lot of cats. And, a cheetah is easy to manage, but a leopard has this speed and just suddenly can just instinctively become dangerous.
Yeah.
And I mean, Jagger knew this as well. He said, they're dangerous, these animals. So when we put the two of them in the car together, nowadays with Photoshop, think about it today with Photoshop. You shoot a leopard, you shoot Jagger, splice them together, done, Of course, I wanted some kind of interaction. Now he could have faked it, and the leopard could be doing different things. I just never thought of assembling it. I wanted to get it in one shot, And so then what I decided to do was to build a plexiglass. We had a piece of plexiglass. So there was a fence barrier. And then I always knew that it was a double page, left and a right-hand horizontal shot. And I knew that I could deliver it to them. I could just simply cut out the piece of plexi and stick it together and give it to the magazine spliced. So, of course, at that point, you say, well, why didn't you just shoot the leopard and shoot Jagger? And then you would have spliced it the same way. You could have just cut it and spliced it, because the splice would go into the gutter. You wouldn't see it. I never thought of that. It was the weird thing was I wanted one shot. And in fact, that shot turned out to be later when it surfaced. Lots of people started to buy it from galleries and things like that. Yeah. Because Jagger's looking a little bit nervous and the leopard's there kind of looking suspicious. However, when they were building that partition, I said, let me do, just to make up time, let me do a portrait of Jagger. I'll do a portrait of the leopard, but I'll shoot it on the same roll of film. So it's a double exposure. Once again, the kind of thing now, you can just source a shot of a leopard, take a picture of Jagger,
absolutely,
and you can just Photoshop them together. Everybody, any young person looking at that just assumes that's how that was done.
Yeah.
But in fact, it was done on one piece of film,
Yeah. Yeah.
I just rewound. I never thought it would work. I photographed the leopard first, and I drew where the leopard was, the eyes and the nose, on the viewfinder with a China marker.
Oh, my word. Is that how it was done?
And then I fitted his eyes into the leopard's eyes, so they were the same size.
Good heavens. I didn't realize it was done like that. That's so ingenious.
To be quite honest, I was just making up stuff at that time. Because the main shot I was interested in, so, and then there was a huge fight after that because I had to send it to Jagger, and in those days you didn't send it on a phone or anything like that. we had to send him a Xerox fax machine thing, and he saw it. He said, "Oh, it looks great, no problem." And then later that night, he was in LA. The next thing was, when I got in the next morning, there were 3 calls from Jagger on the phone, on my answering machine, saying, "Don't give it to Rolling Stone. I want to use it myself." And of course, by this time, I'd already given it to Rolling Stone. Of course, then there was a big fight. And he kept saying to Rolling Stone, why don't you use the other shot? And Jan Venner at Rolling Stone says, "I haven't even seen the other shot. This is the one I want," something.
There's a wonderful, I'm going to call it an Albert Wattsian quote. Your driving force should be 5% kit, 95% what you're going to do. Of course, digital, Albert, has brought about a fascination for more and more resolution, bigger and better ways to practically shoot in the dark, high ISO and so on and so forth. Do you think that somehow masked the 5% that you talk about? That's the most important bit.
There are some weird things about the digital revolution. I spent 40 years in a darkroom printing because I love printing. It didn't matter if it was silver, platinum palladium, cyanotypes, any other process I could get my hands on and practice in the darkroom, And after 40 odd years in the darkroom, when I got onto a computer screen, it was amazing how much that those 40 years played when you're on a cold computer screen. I became fascinated with Photoshop, and there were aspects of it that I thought were just awful, terrible, and cheap looking. But there were other aspects where I thought, my goodness, I can really use this in a way. And I spoke, if you know the photographer, Sarah Moon, and I remember chatting with her, and I said, "How do you feel about Photoshop?" She says, "Oh my God," she said, "I love it to pieces," she said, And I said, "You're like me." I said, "I absolutely love it." And she said, "Of course, it's full of junk, kind of junk stuff. Special effects. And once you go near that, it's deadly. But once you hold on to your analog training and you go into digital, then and into Photoshop, that's the best thing for me." I remember doing a landscape project in the Orkney Islands, the standing stones in the Orkney Islands.
Oh, yeah.
And with an 8x10 camera. And it was a nightmare. It was really a nightmare. The one thing that I hadn't fully appreciated, talk about planning, and I knew about it, but I thought I would be okay, was the wind. There's actually a shot of the camera where there are 6 huge sandbags on the camera, and you would look at the camera, and the camera in the wind was still, with all the sandbags on it, the camera itself was
still going. Wow.
Was trembling. And of course, with those cameras, you want to shoot at f/22 or f/16 at least, and you look it up, and the next thing was you're shooting at a 15th of a second, and it was problematic in the wind. The wind was a problem, not the camera, and I ended up building a tent around it. So every time you to do it, it was a nightmare. So when I did years later, I did the project on sky, which I was there for 6 weeks photographing sky. I was able to use a phase 1. At that time, it was 100 megapixels. And you could actually shoot several frames. So you could actually create images that were 300 and 400 megapixels, if you wanted, or even more if you wanted, and assemble them in a computer. And I just found them easier to manage.
There's tremendous opportunity in photography now, Albert, and I know you spend a lot of time talking with new upcoming photographers. You have the online course. Your latest book is Albert Watson, Creating Photographs, which unveils even more stories behind the famous shots. But what's the state of the industry now, specifically fashion and portraits? I mean, you arrived at that Max Factor meeting and talked your way in. But what are the opportunities now for those who want to follow a similar footpath?
I think it's very hard for them. I think, it's particularly hard, I think, for the fashion. If you want to be a fashion photographer these days, I think it's very, very tough. It's very hard. And I think a lot of what's kind of fashionable right now is stuff that looks very much like, it was taken on an iPhone. And you even have some photographers, older photographers, that will do a project on an iPhone, to make it more trendy or more simple or whatever. And I think it's very difficult. The fashion business right now is in turmoil. Fashion doesn't change. And which I pointed out that, say, the 50s, 60s, and 70s to a great extent was a time of music and fashion. That was an explosive time. I'm not saying that music and fashion died in 1975, but it was on its way down. And when you look at current, fashion's not so important to your average teenager or 20-year-old. It's less important. And the proof of that is stand outside a high school. And if you go back 10 years, you'll see the kids coming out wearing a hoodie. And guess what they're wearing when they come out of a school today? They're still wearing hoodies and jeans and a T-shirt. It doesn't change. Now, there's one or two pockets of change. But essentially, that idea of street fashion influenced a lot of designers. So the next thing is you would see heavyweight French designers with a hoodie and and jeans and a pair of sneakers. But Chanel might put CC on the sneakers, but they're a pair of sneakers. And I just think that today's amazing 50s, 60s, and 70s, the amazing thing was music and fashion. Today's amazing is technology. To me, technology is unbelievable now. It's a science fiction area to be able to have something as simple as that device, the
iPhone,
just like that. And that can give you any information you want in a second. The amount of information in that device that's in your pocket is staggering. So I think current timing, today's is about technology. It's not about fashion or that. Now, bringing it back to photography, I think there's always opportunity. It'll be interesting to see a young photographer that comes up and, basically could outshoot the generation from the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, of some of the people that were there. And if you look at different genres of photography, even people like Cortez, Brassai, Rodchenko, and then you look at Avedon and Penn, and add to that list another 100, Cartier-Bresson, all of that. I mean, add traditional like Ansel Adams, whatever, you look at that. It was a fairly formidable bunch of people of what they could do. I find some interesting things around, some interesting photography around, and it might be generational. Just because someone did shots of his girlfriend with his iPhone, it looks a little bit lightweight to me, but who knows? That might be the future,
Just finally, I'm glad you mentioned Avedon and Penn, because your name is in this list. Considered one of the 20 most influential photographers of all time, along with Richard Avedon and Irving Penn. It reads well, doesn't it?
Well, it's a little bit grand. I mean, I wish, but because I think they were gigantically outstanding photographers.
Yeah.
But I think their timing when they were dropped on the planet was great. Yeah. In other words, 50s fashion, was kind of outrageous. 47, Dior, and so many designers that were producing outstanding, outrageous clothes.
But it's nice to be in that list.
Oh, yeah. It's very nice. It's just a list. But if you'd shown me that in 1970, I might have fainted or something like that. But, the underlying force of whatever I achieved was driven by deep passion and obsession about photography. That was a driving force. Like when I got a camera in my hand, there were times I was working where it was so cold I couldn't feel fingers at all, but I didn't notice. Obsession and passion, these are all ingredients of the cake of who you are, the recipe of who you are,
My thanks to Albert Watson. A real joy talking with a legend of photography. And that's it for today. Keep sending your questions or feedback to studio@photographydaily.show so that I can feature you in the mailbag edition, which is the Friday Photo Walk. Remember, you can also send in pictures from your own photo walks to appear on the episode's show page online. And if you haven't yet, join our private Facebook group and follow us on Instagram. And on that note, be sure to visit today's website show page for links to Albert, his books, Patreon, our sponsors, and everything talked about. You'll find a link in the description of your podcast player app. And Monday, a National Geo writer, I mentioned him already, and photographer, who's found that life with a 10-mile radius has brought him a sense of photographic satisfaction during lockdown he just didn't think possible.
Yes, I tiptoe downstairs. I kept my cycling gear all sitting on the kitchen table next to my camera bag and dress quietly, slip out the door, wheel the bike out the garden shed, and head off down the street.
But where does he go and what does he photograph? More on Monday. Music in the show was from artlist.io, and I look forward to photographing with you, hearing from you and talking with you on this Friday's Photo Walk show.
Photography Daily is a Loading Zone production.